Diane, do you know if we're going to have a presentation for this, or was it more of a discussion?
Christy is on. She has a PowerPoint that Eric Leitner has, and I think if he's back, he can put that up. There you go.
Okay, yep, I see it. And Christy, are you on? Her name, but she's on mute. But we'll wait a few minutes.
Christy, I think you're on mute.
Diane, can you
hear
hear
you?
me?
Oh yeah, here we go.
All right, great.
Katie, did you want Christy to start or wait until 11:10?
Yeah, no, let's give it some more minutes, and then we'll get started. I'll start it off and
Okay.
turn it over to Christy.
Okay.
It looks like we have most of everybody back from the videos that I served. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And when we first had our first couple of meetings, we had brainstormed a few topics we wanted to hear and a few speakers. One of the suggestions was to have CTC and come to talk to us about what they're doing and some of the progress they've made in Minnesota. But then it became even more interesting when we kind of had hit this whole pandemic thing and obviously the need for broadband for a variety of reasons, including teleeducation and telemedicine. So it seemed appropriate to have CTC come in and give us an update and tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do and even how they're handling this current situation. So Christy has agreed to come and speak to us, so we really want to thank her for that. She's the CEO and General Manager of CTC. But with that, Christy, I'll turn it over to you and let you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair McKelly. We appreciate and really are honored to be here today to talk about CTC, the challenges that we're currently facing and how we've been overcoming them, and then just a little bit about the company in general. Next slide, please. I'm Christy Westbrock. I'm the CEO and General Manager of CTC. I've been in the industry since 1997 when I fell into the wireless business after college. I worked for a small wireless company called Aerial Communications, and at that time they were the first company that could do per second billing in cell phone. And so that company has eventually been acquired several times and is now T-Mobile Wireless. But I worked in site acquisition, and some of the first towers we put up in Minnesota were around that time. And so the career has been long, both wireless, and then I moved to a large, more national scope CLEC, which was Integra Telecom. And 12 years ago, I joined the team at CTC and relocated to rural Minnesota, which is where I absolutely love and cherish being in this area, specifically at this time. Just so you know, I grew up really small town, 600 people, and so the needs of rural America have always been part of my life and something that we will focus on as we talk about the need for broadband also. Next slide. Just a little bit about CTC. We were formed in 1970 when there were 7 men that met. We were called the Crow Wing Cooperative Rural Telephone Company, and they met because they couldn't get access to phone service. And so today we continue to set a new standard in telecommunications for the Brainerd Lakes area and beyond in the state of Minnesota. And that's by bringing state-of-the-art internet, TV, and phone services. We have a little over 13,000 customers with about 11,500 internet circuits and just about 14,000 phone lines that we manage at CTC. As a technology service advisor, we have chose to work with organizations and communities throughout Minnesota and also in the nation. We were the first entity in the state of Minnesota to work successfully in gaining a partnership with an electric co-op and offering services with them through the stimulus funding. But it is our view that we can work with utilities, municipalities, and government entities to build infrastructure. And specifically with the municipalities, we've had very successful relationships in building networks with the city of Little Falls and also the city of Long Prairie. We were fortunate enough to be asked to go to a meeting in Kansas with the telcos and the electrics in that area to talk to them about how electric partnerships can work and municipal entities can be a player in broadband, and then also how government entities can be involved and how we can all work together to be able to deploy out services. We currently have offices in Brainerd, Baxter, and Crosby. Those are our permanent offices, but right now, out of the 62 employees that we have at CTC, we have roughly 90% of our workforce working from home or out of their service vehicles. And we are a cooperative, and so we are owned by our membership, similar to Land O'Lakes. Next slide, please. So our service area, just to give you an idea, we are in the CTC footprint is in the circle. That is our CLEC and our ILEC in our immediate service area. This is where we started and where we've developed and built out full fiber networks throughout those areas. You can see on the state map of where our service area sits, but then also the service area that we are now providing internet to. And so that includes our relationship with Arrowhead Electric. And then we also operate and sell services for the Northeast Services Cooperative, bringing last mile services to business customers in the Iron Range area, and continue to work on developing a very strong partnership with NESC, serving over 100 businesses in that area today off of their network that was also built with BIP funds. Next slide, please. So to talk a little bit about our electric partnerships, we continue to have a very strong relationship with Arrowhead Electric. Arrowhead is in the tip of the Arrowhead, of course, and in Lutzen, Minnesota. That relationship has been in play for over 10 years now. We are on our 3rd service contract with them. For Arrowhead, we provide all of the back office services, escalated customer support, and any service really that they're looking for. If they have advanced sales at resorts, we do that for them. If they want a new TV product or a new marketing product, we do all of those pieces in conjunction with them. They have some local feet on the street, but otherwise everything happens back in the Brainerd Baxter area with us answering the phone for them with True North Broadband, which is their product name on their broadband side. We also have been really fortunate to work in Arrowhead, as all of you know, is quite a distance from us. And so overcoming the distance was something that we had to work through, but certainly is working really well in this day and age. The second is our neighbor, Mille Lacs Electric. Our service territory in our ILEC, or regulated footprint, sits right up against Mille Lacs, and also the build out that we did in the city of Aiken also bumps up to their service area. And so we started partnering with them to provide services to their electric membership, and are currently working on our 4th project with them to build out services across their footprint. And they've been really successful in what they're doing, and again, a very strong partnership. The 3 of us together, along with a couple of other electrics that we're talking to right now, will be looking at how to work consortiums and some different things through the RDOF process. And go on to the next slide. CTC is a huge proponent of funding. We know that our cooperative membership on their backs cannot possibly build out areas that are unserved today with fiber networks because of the cost associated, but we are able to make models work when we do funding and different grant projects. Our funding and grants have went all the way back to 2010 when we started working with the local school district to build our first fiber ring, all the way up to this year in 2020 with our state of Minnesota broadband grant that's in our CTC service area. A couple of things to note in our list of grant awards. We were the first telco in the state of Minnesota to win a Community Connect grant application. That came in 2018, and we were able then to help Mille Lacs Electric secure a grant application or a grant award in 2019. And so both of those awards are projects that we are working on. And then the other is that we were one of two companies in Minnesota that received a RUS Reconnect grant award, and that's in Cherry Township, which pushes more towards the Iron Range area in Minnesota, but again, an unserved area with very poor wireless service that we are looking to get hooked up and have clearance on environmentals to start that project. Next slide. Just to give you an idea of how important funding and funding mechanisms are to get our un- and underserved service locations filled. When we look at all of our CTC and partner applications, so that's anyone that we've worked with, the electric partners, tribal partners, cities, counties, we've applied for monies to serve 17,000 total locations. It's been over 60 million that we've asked. We've had total grant awards of 18 million to date. And then CTC or other entities has supplied 13 million to that, with a total commitment of 31 million in the partners and with CTC's commitment. For CTC alone, we've served 6,200 locations with grant opportunity and grant awards. We've applied for 33 million in funding and have been awarded almost 12 million. CTC has put $10 million of investment into that, so a total grant funds of 21 million, and then the committed money from CTCs. So we do continue to invest our members' money and our members' equity into these broadband networks, which during this time have proved to be nothing but the most robust and outstanding decision that's been made over the long term to get these fiber connections made. Next slide, please. So on to the COVID-19 crisis, and certainly that is how we felt and what we were experiencing at the onset of this. I think I'll talk about how we've solutioned a lot of different things and how we're making our business work today. So next slide, please. So the very first thing we knew we had to do was figure out how to manage our employee base and make sure that they stayed safe. So number one on our list was the employees. And so we made a pretty immediate move on March 17th prior to a lot of companies moving home. We made the determination, because of our emergency preparedness plan that we had in place, all of our employees can work from home except those that do not have any internet services, which there are a handful of them. And so everyone moved home to their home offices by March 17th. We had everything up and running within about a day and a half, with a few glitches here and there, but certainly having a remote plan set up and in place was super helpful at the time, because it was a pretty quick move to get everyone home. The second piece that was extremely immediate was we knew we were going to need network upgrades and immediate network upgrades. We started to really look at what our bandwidth was going to look like and what capacity needs were going to be. We're fortunate that we built a 100 gig network to the 511 in Minneapolis, and so we were able to turn up additional ports on that to be able to double our bandwidth capacity in a very short time frame. And those maintenances are complete, and we're sitting really well, so people aren't experiencing delays or buffering or those types of things during this time. We're going to talk a little bit about the dashboard that we use and how we're measuring productivity and consumption, and also the things that we're doing to keep our employees engaged, both productivity-wise and culturally. All right, if you want to move on to the next slide. This was about a week after we moved everyone home, and they sent us their pictures of their offices. As you can see, a lot of furry friends got their first opportunity to work from home with their moms and dads, and so we certainly started engaging employees in having some fun to keep culture engaged. So next slide, please. This slide has become, or this dashboard has become, a critical tool for us in managing our business. And so what you're looking at on these slides is, the first is where we're doing speed upgrades versus hardship credits, and then where we're seeing credit ratings or things where we needed to provide the services free or with no cost, and how that was going to look going forward, and talk a little bit about the financial impact to us at this point. And then the second was our calls received, answered, rejected, and abandoned. During the first initial phase of this, we were seeing our call volumes really spike, and we were able to answer above our average of calls with the same call time and abandon rate that we were typically seeing. And so there was a lot to be said about moving people home and maybe some of the efficiencies that we're seeing from telework also. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about bandwidth consumption, because it's really been fascinating. So our overall peak bandwidth in February prior to all of this was 32 gigs on the peak. And then in March, we took a 28% increase to move up to 41 gigs. The CTC, that was for our total customer base. So that includes Arrowhead Electric, Mille Lacs Electric, and then the people that are purchasing wholesale services from us. For our CTC customers, we were at 22.3 gigs, and in March we jumped up 26.6 for a 20% or 19% increase. And so certainly we saw that go up, but what's happening today that is extremely fascinating, and it comes back to, I think, Bernadine, you were asking about some speed goals and things, is we have always measured everything, just as peak and download. But when you look at the upload for the company right now, we used to have our highest upload every night at 8 o'clock. That was just kind of standard when our upload was the highest. Our upload now peaks from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day. We're suspecting because of distance learning and people working from home is causing that. But we've increased our upload during that peak time by 25%. And so it is critical that as we're looking at speed goals to keep in mind how important upload is at this time and what we're seeing for that, and to make sure we're managing speeds. 6 a.m. is our lowest bandwidth consumption time, and 9 p.m. is just always our peak. Interesting, we always used to be able to start our maintenances at midnight because people were typically sleeping and people were typically not on the internet. We are now seeing that our internet doesn't fall off until about 2 a.m. And so our maintenances now have a shorter maintenance window because people are online longer. We must be staying up later and doing more work into later hours. But we are not able to use the same maintenance windows anymore. So that's been an adjustment to have shorter time frames to get the work done. Right, next slide. So just to talk about the employees, because culturally we are, we manage and monitor our culture on a really regular basis, because we think that our employees, and I'm sure for many of you, but for us, our employees are top of the game for what we need to make sure that we continue our reputation and that we can keep doing these projects. If we can't get buy-in to serve areas in the iron range from our employees and get them excited about it, it makes projects harder. But this is a group of employees that loves to jump on board to these new things. We've done some really fun things, like we have meat raffles during our happy hour, so we don't just do a happy hour, but we do an actual meat raffle while we're there and give away fun meat packs. We've been playing Quarantine Survival Bingo, which is actually an exercise bingo game, so that we're getting people out, and then they have prizes for that. We have an all-employee call every Thursday at 3:30. We sent all of our employees t-shirts that say "Be social from a distance," and the O is a guy with a mask on his face. And so we've just been taking a lot of different initiatives with our employees to ensure that culture is maintained at this time. All right, next slide. So our membership, the heart of being a co-op. And so to help our members, the FCC Keep America Connected pledge we signed on to, We've offered service discounts, large service discounts for some very hurting customers in the business community. Speed increases, we've been doubling people's speed. All they have to do is call in and ask for a speed increase to be doubled. We've added Wi-Fi hotspots, and then I'll talk about our Broadband Inbox product. Next slide. I'm sure most of you are very into the Keep America pledge of not terminating services to any residential or small business because of their inability to pay it, waiving late fees, and then opening our Wi-Fi hotspots. That's a pledge that we signed on to early, and certainly something that we would have supported with or without the FCC asking for that to be done. Just a couple of points there when you talk about challenges. We currently, right now, are over $10,000 a month in business revenue loss just due to service suspension and closed businesses. That's a number that we look at every week just to really focus on what that's going to be if businesses can't open back up. Seasonal is huge for us with our resort community. If resorts start shutting down services, revenue and cash flows are number one for us to pay attention to right now. And then the second piece that we're struggling with is the supply chain. The access to fiber, the access to materials is just getting harder all the time. Our recent quote on fiber was 16 to 18 weeks out to have a fiber delivery on projects. So supply chain continues to be a concern. Next slide, please. So this is our Wi-Fi hotspots. We turned up, so we have nearly 50 of them. We turned up probably 20 to 25 of them in a very short amount of time when we knew that we were going to need more Wi-Fi hotspots around our service area for those that couldn't get connected. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those things. Let's see. Next slide, please. Sorry. So Broadband Inbox. This is probably the most creative way that we've gone about doing business. We got very concerned about sending our techs inside the home to do installations, and so we dubbed what's Broadband in a Box. And you know how people, when they get an Apple device, they tend to keep the box that an Apple phone or an Apple iPad came in? I'm hoping someday this is like such a great product that nobody will throw the box away, although right now that has not been perfected at all. But what this is basically it's a self-install. So our technician brings the box to the customer's home. We set it down for the customer to come out and get. And then the technician, in some way, shape, or form, either via the phone or they will Skype or they'll video call each other, whatever the customer's most comfortable with, then we'll go inside of the home virtually with the customer to get the internet connected. Now, is it ideal and is it anything that can be sustained over a long term? I think from a sustainability perspective on just internet only, yeah, you could make something like this work going into the future. But set-top boxes for TV installs, large wireless systems within the homes, anything that's more complex has really just had to kind of stay on hold to a certain extent until we're able to come in and spend more time in the home. We also have lots of provisions for when we're going into the home, from distancing with the customer, asking the customer to go outside or to be in other rooms and those types of things. But for the most part, our technicians are fully doing installs from the outside and getting very creative of where wires are running and trying to keep everyone connected. Next. Oh, and we're trademarking our Broadband in a Box product, so we're excited about that too. As far as our community goes, the public schools mapping project was probably one of the most rewarding. And so what happened was our school district sent us the lists of every student that they knew that did not have service in their schools, and we matched that list then up with our GIS mapping system, and we are able to tell exactly the point of how far the student was from our network. We also have done things like generating local business revenues, critical worker appreciation, and then our social media. We'll talk a little bit more about public schools. You can go to the next slide. So you can see on this map somewhat that the potentials of within 1,000 feet of our existing structure were in red, and then the potential Wi-Fi locations from a home was in blue, the Wi-Fi hotspots was in green, and then drop locations were in white. And so we were able to do is overlay every student that we had into that, and we put them priority. We implemented a full week of work going past, I think it was the March 23rd week. We did not quit over the weekends, and we pretty much pushed through to try to beat the COVID getting to our service area. And so this was super successful, and we were able to hook up about 104 students basically in a 5-day span of time. Next slide, please. And just as helping our community, we have purchased a lot of gift cards locally to give out to employees and customers during this time and generate business revenue within our service territory. Next slide, please. Once a week, we do appreciation for local critical workers, and so we take a different sector every week. If it's educators or radio stations, newspapers, police, firemen, sanitation workers, you name it, and we're getting something out there using a local retailer to thank them for their time and the work that they're doing at this strange time. And last but not least is our social media on the next slide. And we've seen a 50% engagement in our social media and our posts. We just really have focused on connecting the community, that we're here to help, that people should call us if financially they're struggling to be able to pay their bills or to be able to keep their services. And then having personal posts from our technicians, our employees working from home, and then our members that are at home. Today, this afternoon, we're having our first virtual CTC board meeting, and we also are going to have our CTC annual meeting for the first time in a virtual setting also. And so taking things that were challenges and turning them into how we can make them work during this time is specifically what we are doing. Just want to end by telling you one story, and I think it represents the cooperative engagement in rural broadband. But we had a customer that called in to let us know kind of their financial situation. Both had been laid off. They have 3 students. They just really were struggling with some different things in their life financially. And they did tell us that if it wasn't for the programs that we had and for the way that we're able to service them with the fiber network and provide them promotions and discounts, that they wouldn't have afforded to be able to have those services. And so again, sometimes in the co-op world, we're able to make a few different things work based on the need of the membership versus it always just being a bottom line decision. And so that is what I have for you today. I will, I guess, pass it back to the chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Christy. That was really good, and I appreciate you taking the time to go through this with us. Task force members, any questions for Christy at the moment?
A question.
Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, okay. Christy, when you look at an area of the state like the Iron Range, northeastern Minnesota, and the possibility of working with an electrical co-op as being perhaps the most expedient way to get fiber to remote locations, is that a conversation that you initiate, or is that something that has to be kind of already prepared or mapped out by the community or the group that's interested in that project?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Yes, so in a few cases, specifically in the Iron Range and in northern Minnesota, we are working with a couple of electrics right now, trying to continue to get them to deploy out services in the areas that are unserved today, with us working with them as potentially back office or service provider, or sometimes just consulting with them to help them understand the provisions of an RDOF auction or understand how funding or those types of things work. But certainly, we see a huge benefit in the partnership. And when you can make an electric partnership work, it saves electric co-op members money, and it saves the telco customers money, because you have such efficiencies in the equipment and the back office pieces that you can really leverage a lot of those shared costs and shared expenses. And so yes, we do, Steve, keep working with that. And again, we're open to anyone engaging us with those electrics, but we try to reach out to do that also.
Hi, this is Mark Johnson. Christy, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Mark, how are you?
Hi, good. Mark Johnson from ECMEC, down to the south and east of you. Question just on the school part. You had Brainerd up there and you looked at how you kind of mapped things out. Did you do that for all of your service area? First question. And secondly, did the schools come to you or did you go to the schools? I'm just curious how that worked for you and how well it worked in terms of communication with the schools.
Yep, so we went to the schools right away and said, if you get us a list, we can help you with this. And so that was kind of a reach out initially with their IT groups. The students in our ILEC school districts, we didn't end up mapping because they all have fiber to the home. And so those districts were a lot different to look at versus the districts where we do have competitive service providers in them. And maybe we don't have 100% fiber coverage in those areas.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Nice to see you.
Hi, this is Shannon. I have a quick question. That's all right. This might be a little bit unfair to ask, Christy, but I've been thinking about what does the world look like when we go back to normal? So many people have, taken broadband service because they had to, who didn't have it before. What do you think the world will look like? Do you think people will retain their broadband service that, picked it up just because of the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Shannon. Good to hear from you. We spend a lot of time talking about what re-entry looks like and what getting back to some normalcy means. And I think that, Shannon, it's my belief that we have to find a way for people to have affordable broadband connections, but that cannot all fall on the back of the person providing, the company providing the connection. And we really do need some sort of generated program that we are able to recoup some of the costs for either offering free or extremely reduced price services, or to somehow have a mechanism that fits into grants or refund opportunities. Senator Klobuchar's legislation today would be very helpful to address some of those pieces that are coming through the pledge that we took with the FCC. I don't suspect, especially with distance learning, that people are going to be able to shut off their broadband connection within the next 12 months, and that their students are going to need it. In the summertime, it'll be interesting to see where that falls. But I'm crossing my fingers, Shannon, that this really highlights the need for affordable connections and low-income support.
Great. Thank you so much, Christy, and thanks for talking today. I think this was a really good perspective for the task force to hear.
Thank you, Shannon.
Hi, Christy. This is Teresa Sunday from MediaCom. I just want to comment that this was really, really a good report. I really took a lot of notes. Kudos to you for being ahead of this, for one. And two, the employee incentives with meat raffles and bingo and T-shirts. I mean, that's really good to hear. That's just, you're all over it. Just kudos.
Oh, thank you, Teresa. I appreciate that.
Christy, this is Steve Bensky with the Township Association. Got a question. As you guys look ahead, is DTC still interested in the grant programs? Are the things that we are working on still relevant, or is there going to be a change for a while?
Yes, so we've already started to anticipate that if there is the funding available for the schools, the school allocation, we've already started to talk to our school districts about some ideas of how we could be a supporter in a grant application for the education institutions. And then as far as the Minnesota broadband grant applications, we're already in the process of working with some townships and some additional areas that have opened up in our footprint due to some mapping changes where we'll be able to apply for grant applications. So I think it's extremely relevant. We also, I would say, spend a lot of time, a great deal of time right now on RDOF auction and really analyzing what the break-even point is for us to take funds in the auction and in the different areas across the state.
Thank you. And that actually brings up something else. You mentioned the mapping and the changes, and that's been a topic of discussion for a group. Do what's been the experience with the mapping for the grant program for CTC? Is it working? Is it accurate? Or are there issues? Any sense of that?
Yeah, it's not accurate. It's an issue, and we get stuck on it often. I can give you a specific example, and that's one of the census blocks that's where CTC has service on one side of the lake, but we don't have service on the opposite side of the lake. And it's in our ILEC area, so we were able to use our ILEC funding to be able to build fiber on that side of the lake. But the other side of the lake, I swear, if we drove in with a van, that we'd be just, people would be like jumping for joy that it was coming to them. But again, they show that they're completely served by CTC, and we know factually that we don't provide them any service. And so we actually, in our broadband grant application, are going to try to put some of that into it, of saying, here's where we believe the map is wrong, we don't serve this area, yet we'd like to have it eligible for funding. And if that does or doesn't go anywhere, we just want to highlight it in the grant applications when we put them in.
Thank you.
Christy, there's a question. I think Bernadine was having issues with her mic. She said, thanks for the presentation. Please say more about your efforts to coordinate with other ISPs in your area to respond to RDOF. Is there a role for the state in these efforts?
Thank you, Bernadine. We are working with other ISPs, other cooperatives, and electrics in forming a consortium to be able to bid in the RDOF auction. And there's some real benefits to a consortium, and I'm not sure how much you want me to go into this, but one of the main benefits with the consortium is that you get to split consultant costs amongst them. And so when you put in your short form as a consortium group, you put that all in together. You then are able to talk to each other so that you're not on top of each other bidding on census blocks or colluding, which we ran into. That because we were all following the anti-collusion rules last time, you found that there was times when co-ops were bidding against other co-ops, and when we could have probably had a consortium at that time. But so yes, we're working on that. We're working on pulling in electrics and telco co-ops into that consortium right now, and then bidding on a bigger geographic area. The nice thing is that the consortiums do not have to be contiguous, and so really you could add 2 companies from Texas and 3 from Michigan into the consortium if you wanted to make that work. But there's a lot of money, Bernadine, in the RDOF auction, and I'm hoping a lot of it's coming to Minnesota.
I hope so too.
Oh,
So last question. And Bernadine says, and what's the role of the state? Any thoughts on that one?
I'd say the role for the state is going to be in the final map validation of what that looks like, how the RDOF auction and the state broadband grant funds are going to play together or work together, because the timelines are going to get skewed of when the announcements are made and when the grant applications for Minnesota go in. And so I think sorting through mapping and then timelines is going to be important for the state.
Thanks, Christy. And then last question, I'd say is, so what could we do for you, right? Like, as this task force, how can we help you, as we make our recommendations, whether it's during the course of the year or even at the end when we kind of conclude and do our final report? What are some of the things we could do to support with your efforts?
The maps, I would say, are our number one concern, to get the maps cleaned up so that we really can utilize the funding the right way in those specific areas. The second piece, and that's regulation. And this is one for me that we struggle with on a regular basis, and that is, it takes too long to get through the system when our construction months are only 4 months a year. And so we somehow need to have better timelines of when approvals come through from the SHPO and the Section 106 tribal, those pieces, how they're coming through the system, so that the day the ground is thawed, we can be out and plowing, and what that looks like. And so one of the things that I have brought up more at a national level than a state level is that projects that are in the existing road right-of-way that have been in disturbed soil, perhaps there's a mechanism that those could go through the system more quickly versus going through the full environmental project on full environmental project. And this for me is just so you know more through the RUS projects and through the Reconnect and Community Connect and those types of things on a federal level. But we've gotten some really great help from Senator Smith's office, and then just last week from Representative Colin Peterson's office. He's extremely helpful in one of our projects and helping us move it forward.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Christy, for taking the time to come and share kind of the efforts you're putting in. We commend you and applaud you and all the work there. I mean, it's been tremendous throughout this period. To you and your team, obviously. Keep up the awesome job, and we'll do our best to see how we can support you through our recommendations and working with the governor's office and the legislature.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so shifting gears, the next item on the agenda was really to talk about COVID-19 impacts. We're running about 17 minutes over time, so what I'd recommend is maybe we start out with the report outs from the subgroups, and then I'm guessing we may gain some time there, and if not, we'll just use the slot at the end of other business to talk about other things related to COVID-19. So switching over to the subgroups, the first one is the Minnesota model, and Brian, I believe you're going to lead us through this one. Although we've had a change in leadership there, maybe you'll kind of update us about that on the report out.
All right, thank you, Teddy. First of all, we're sorry to hear that Shannon is going to be leaving, and I want to thank her, and I know all of our committee members do also, for her leadership to give us a really good start on our process. So we wish her the best and thank her for all of her contributions. So I was, I'll just say, selected as the chair, and I hope I can do as good a job as Shannon did. What we're going to do is talk a little bit about what's coming or in the process of the legislature right now in regard to broadband funding. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul. He's going to give us a little bit of an update, and I think we'll kind of round robin this if needed, just to talk about issues going on right now in regard to funding in the legislature. So, Paul, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Brian. There's been some activity at the legislature here in the last couple of weeks, even most recently today. Kind of starting with the House, the Greater Minnesota Committee moved forward with House File 3029. I know Angie was, and both Brent Christensen were both kind of testifying in support of that. The Cable Association testified in support. Allocates an additional $10 million for broadband, and then I think it's $8 for distance learning, and then $2 million for telemedicine. That bill was favorably passed and now moves to Ways and Means. Similarly, in the Senate Finance actually met today. It was about an hour and a half meeting, a little bit of debate on the bill, not so much on the merits, but just kind of the implementation, where the money would be going, urban versus rural, some of those discussions. It was unanimously passed by the Senate Finance Committee. It'll go to the floor. Again, it was meant to kind of match up with the House version, although I think there's going to be a couple slight, I would call, technical differences that either will get worked out in conference committee or maybe just concurred by one side or the other. But similar, $10 million for additional broadband funding, $8 million for distance learning, $2 million for telemedicine. There's a provision in there that really kind of talks about if some of this funding comes from the federal government, then the commissioner of budget could maybe, put that money back into the general fund, not necessarily be taken by the general fund. But it is good news from, additional funding. We'll see where this goes. I think we've got about 13 days left in the legislature before everything closes up, at least for the legislative session, provided there's, not a special session down the road. But, there'll be more to come. Probably good just to keep an eye on the Ways and Means Committee as this goes forward in any type of omnibus bill that both sides start negotiating on here in the next week or so.
Thank you, Paul. I think the other thing on the distance learning and the telemedicine, and looking at that legislation, it looks like a lot of that is for reimbursement, if I'm correct.
This is Mark. Angie, I think go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, this is Mark Johnson. If I can chime in, because I know about the distance learning portion of it, and you are correct, that is almost exclusively reimbursement for expenses that school districts have incurred during this crisis.
Thanks, Mark. Any final comments, Paul?
Nope, that's it. I guess I just would add, I did ask the question of Senator Smith earlier. I got, maybe some of the other industry folks may be an aside, but I think it's something as a task force, working with our various stakeholder groups, we're going to need to keep an eye on it. We're anticipating kind of a robust ask for broadband as part of whether it's an infrastructure bill or COVID-19 supplemental bill, but we believe that this is kind of coming from the AT&T federal side, that there's going to be a robust ask. So I think it's going to, be incumbent upon all of us. This isn't a done deal, but for all of us that are broadband advocates over the next several weeks, as that starts to materialize and you maybe see a bill or something, we're going to want to get our advocacy role lined up. I mean, I kind of asked the senator that question just so, we can help her, we can help our federal legislators. So this really goes along with the state effort that's going on right now.
Totally agree, Paul, and thanks for the report. Our tariff really has not changed, just with the update of the chair position. And I would ask if Steve or Teresa have any comments, or Shannon, any comments about your new role either?
I don't have anything.
No.
Nothing from me.
This is Shannon. Thank you for your kind words. I am moving literally and figuratively. I'm leaving private practice and going in-house at Northwestern Energy in Helena, Montana. So I am sad to depart the state and private practice, but I have very much enjoyed my short time on this task force, and I will definitely remain available as a behind-the-scenes resource as needed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We might take you up on that. We might call you.
That is pretty much what we had, Teddy, so I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, team. And obviously, congratulations, Shannon, on the new role. Sad to see you leave, but I think it's going to be, like you said, maybe a great opportunity for you. And we will definitely take you up. I know you have plenty of experience as you've been on the previous task forces as well. So, we'll definitely take you up on that one. Okay, next subgroup is the barriers in technology. Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Teddy. Hello again, everybody. Mark Johnson. And I'm inviting Dave Wolf, our co-chair, and all of the members of our group to chime in when I forget to say something or when there's something to add. So please feel free to do that. We've got our charter up on the screen for those of you that are at computers. We did make some modifications to this after the last meeting, gained a little bit more direction. A couple of highlights I'll just point out of things that we've talked about. We had a pretty good discussion about the speed goals at our subgroup meeting, and I think that's going to be something that we're going to tackle. I was happy to hear from the Pew Group, and they have some information about state speed goals around the nation that we're taking a look at. And it was good to hear Christy from CTC talk about their statistics and the upload issue that they have experienced, with that peak now between, I think she said 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. We had a lot of discussion about that too. We're doing, within our school districts in my area, we're doing a regional survey. And right now we're hearing very, very clearly from our parents, our families, that distance learning and working and, on a, not an anecdotal basis, the work from home issues that they are having with being able to be participatory in things like we're doing right now, a video conference meeting, or students uploading assignments or uploading a video that they did to their teacher to show evidence of their learning. Those kinds of things are very frustrating for these parents. And anecdotally, we're seeing 20 to 25%, and I will have good statistics on this once we get our data collection done, but so far preliminarily and a bit anecdotally at this point, 20 to 25% of the families are struggling with participating in distance learning, and again, on a side note, work from home, because of their broadband. And they are in areas, and I go back to what Christy was talking about from CTC, they're in areas that on the maps show served. But yet we also have them do a speed test, which is a snapshot in time and not a great metric. But we do find that those who are having issues, their upload speeds are dismal, 0.26, and things like that. So that's something that our group is kind of looking at and wants to look at very closely as we talk about speed goals. We really have to look at that productivity side of it and that upload piece. So we want to make sure that we make everybody aware of that and that becomes part of our conversation. We have some anticipated challenges and barriers we've added to that on both the first and second page. Money and cost, of course, is always an issue, but we've talked about we've heard ways that there may be funding that will help to address some of those things. It's interesting, we talked about the use of broadband at this point, and with the changes and everybody at home, how are the providers able to handle those changes? And it was good to hear from Christy about that. And Dave mentioned some things from his point of view as a provider of sort of that shift in time in which the peaks are occurring, and that seems to be what's happening. It would be good on a statewide basis maybe if we had information about how all the providers are experiencing this change. And is it just a time shift, and are the networks able to handle it? Have they upgraded their networks? Have they done things like that? It might be kind of nice to know about that. From potential agenda items, we talked about a virtual tour or demo of the MICE, down in Minneapolis, the kind of the companion to the 511 building. Maybe a report from the low Earth orbit satellite providers or somebody that can speak to that, because I know it was in the news just recently. They launched another set of the LEO satellites. Then someone to talk about DOCSIS and the copper end of high-speed broadband and where that's at, and as a technology, again, being the technology and barriers group, sort of making sure everybody knows about the technologies that are available and what the current landscape is for that. As well as a report from some of our providers who've done CAF2 rollouts and how that has worked and what the challenges that they have had with those rollouts has been, because I think there have been some of those. So that's kind of some of the things that our group is talking about. Dave or any of my group members want to add anything before we take questions?
Mark, you really captured it. I think the underlying theme here is COVID added a whole pile of new data points for us, for our committee.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, for pointing that out, because I think we talked a lot about data collection. We're doing it, and I thank you again because I missed that. We're doing it from the school level, but I wondered if DEED or any other groups are going to collect data from a work-at-home sort of point of view in terms of what have people's work-at-home experiences been, or if there are other data collections that are going on around that and around broadband. We want to be able to capture that data because, like you said, Dave, there are a lot of data points with this crisis that give us an opportunity to learn a great deal, and that might speak toward the mapping too, in terms of how. Go ahead.
One other quick thing: did anyone get a chance to look up into the northwest sky this past weekend to see Elon Musk's satellites lined up, the 60 satellites?
didn't know.
I didn't. I heard about it.
Okay.
SpaceX and all that.
Yep.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see when that takes off, what it actually can do.
It will be.
Got to keep an eye on it.
So that's our report, Teddy. If anybody has any questions or anything, or you've got things to add, things you want us to look at, please make sure you let us know.
That's good. Any questions for the team? Okay, thanks, Mark, and the subgroup. Yeah, it'll be interesting to the Elon Musk thing. I think they're targeting something like 2,500 satellites or something is what they want to have up over the next few years. So that would be, let's see what that looks like. Okay. Was there a question? Oh. All right, the next one is the economic development and digital inclusion. So Bernadine, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Thanks for being here today with us all. Mark and I coordinated our outfits today, so we'd be wearing the same outfits here for. I want to start out by thanking Diane for her support of our subgroup. She joins our meetings. It's been great to have her on board to kind of keep us connected to what the other groups are doing and cross-pollinating and stuff, so thanks a lot for that, Diane. So Dale and Micah and I have met again since we last met, and one of our we were all invited as subcommittees to recommend presenters to the task force, and so glad to be able to hear today from the Pew Trust folks. Thank you for that, our subcommittee, and I know Mark's as well recommended that we hear from Pew, so that was really helpful. I want to thank folks for that. You'll recall from previous meetings that our group has pulled out of past task force reports those recommendations relevant to our scope of work as a subcommittee, economic development and digital inclusion. And we are almost completed with our efforts, and again, Diane helped us with this, to kind of survey what's the status on those recommendations that made by past task force. Have they been addressed or not? Where are we at? What have we seen? And from that review, then, we will be able to, that will be an input to the recommendations that we as a task force are developing to bring forward for our review by this full committee for inclusion in this year's report. I was listened with great interest today when Anna Reed reported on Tennessee and California that have carve-outs or dedicated funds for adoption as well as access. And I know past task force recommendations have included an adoption recommendation like that, so that'll be, we'll be looking at that as a potential model, or just to see what success other states have done in that regard. The other thing I would mention in terms of our goals and deliverables for this year is our task force our subcommittee is planning on developing a panel of broadband champions to present to the task force in our October meeting. We had originally planned to have that task force meeting piggyback up with the annual state broadband conference scheduled in the Brainerd Lakes area. That conference is being reimagined now, and we're going to do it some version of a virtual online conference, and are still so hoping to be able to proceed, and that this group will still be able to meet with and hear from representatives of some of the grant projects that the state have funded, and that content then can also be repurposed for our report, because we want to be able to show the economic development impact of broadband networks. So we're working towards identifying some teams, some stories to share out at the October meeting. And other than that, working on developing our recommendations based on what we're learning from where we're at from previous recommendations. That's kind of what I've got. I'm going to invite Dale and Micah to see if my co-team members want to add anything from our subgroup.
Thanks, Bernadine. At least from my part, I think you've covered it. I always like to be able to add something, but I think you got it.
you, Bernadine, Dale, and Micah. Any questions to the subgroup from others? Okay, well, I appreciate everyone's effort in providing those updates and meeting and starting to crystallize some of your thinking. I think that's phenomenal. I think both two subgroups mentioned it. Again, if you have, as you go through and have discussions and there are some speakers you'd like to hear and you also believe the greater task force should hear about from them, you can funnel that to Diane. Her and I and Angie meet regularly before these meetings and take those into account, and then we make sure that we can get those speakers lined up for our discussion. So I think that's a key piece and a good way to funnel the right topics we should discuss on this task force. We heard a little bit about the legislation that's kind of being proposed right now, or at least the funding with the 20 million, 10, 8, and 2. So hopefully that goes through and see kind of how that progresses, and then hopefully we can get at least some of the funding there to be able to help us accelerate and get closer to our goals as we go forward, and help through these kind of challenging times as well. With that, there was one topic we skipped earlier. It was around COVID-19, and we heard from CTC, we heard from some of the subgroups. I didn't know if there was anything else that we wanted to discuss as a task force that we probably should keep in mind at this moment. Didn't have anything specific, but I know, Steve George, I know you sent me an email, something around something we wanted to share to the group around mapping. And I don't know if there were some things we needed to talk about just kind of as an open item, and we can use the time now to do that.
Well, Teddy, if I can just comment on that article, if you can share that with the full task force. Obviously, there's concern being expressed by various groups about the inadequate and inaccurate mapping, and we keep hearing that from the providers, so we know it's an issue. And I think that we might want to have a discussion to see if it makes sense to actually invest in a project, a mapping project for the state of Minnesota that would provide us with assurances that we're going to have accurate data going into that RDOF auction. And so I know there's a company out there that's looking at that opportunity at a very reasonable price. We're doing a project here in St. Louis County. And so maybe that's something that the task force might want to consider. But we're getting pinched in these rural areas, those difficult areas to get to because of inaccurate reporting. And Frontier, I don't know why they did this, but they're indicating that they've gotten service at 25.3 in huge blocks of northeastern Minnesota and the state for that, and they're not accurate. So perhaps that's something the task force and with the funding we have at the border-to-border grant program might make a lot of sense to us to invest some of those funds in a map for the entire state.
Mm-hmm.
Steve,
that's a good suggestion. Go ahead, Mark.
No, Teddy and Steve, yeah, and I will add to that. That bit I said about the survey that we're doing, I think that's true. What Steve is seeing up in his region, we see that in our region too. So I'm pretty sure that that's a statewide issue. And then I'll add that one thing we have to consider is the timing of the RDOF program in terms of when something like this would have to happen. It's basically sooner than later, because that isn't going to be able to wait into another legislative season, I guess is what I'm saying.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. There's been some changes. There was at the federal level. There was the legislation, because the way FCC was collecting the information was at the census block, right? So if you had a provider in an area, they said, did you have the census block covered? They say yes. They could have two people covered in that census block, and all of a sudden, there's 5,000 other people that supposedly have that same coverage, and that's not the case, right? There's been legislation now, and I don't know when it comes. I know it's been passed, and maybe we can get someone to come help speak at our task force and then see what we do for Minnesota. But there's going to be requirements now where they can't do that anymore, where they just report the census block, but it's going to be based on GIS maps, meaning they have to show the area they cover with their service, and then that's what determines coverage or not. And I think that's going to have a tremendous impact on the FCC, because it's going to go from, 18 million people are not covered to a number much bigger than that. So there's a little bit of politics. And I've asked for the mapping, and we're relying so much on the FCC. Do we have another way of doing it? I think there'll be a healthy discussion to get into.
And just so you know, the other link that I included on that email this morning was a link to the mapping project that we're doing, crowdsourcing in St. Louis County. That's provided, we've got over 5,600 tests taken in 3 weeks. So we're getting a lot of new, very critical and accurate information on actual speed tests in these areas that are being wrongly reported. But so that link is on there if anybody wants to take a minute to look at that map.
Okay. And maybe, Steve, one thing we could do is have you also share with us what we guys have done in St. Louis County, right? And just so that we understand kind of the way you've looked at it and the way you've applied it and what some of the findings might be.
Teddy, this is Shannon. I would just offer one caution. I think it's interesting and definitely worth the task force looking at these issues, but remember that speed testing and crowdsourcing measure what people are buying, not what is available. And so we just have to be careful not to wander far afield or too far afield of our charter. That's just a caution I would offer.
Agreed. Like what's available to folks versus what actually is being consumed, right? Or
if I may chime in on that too, this is Nolan. So as far as like the speed testing stuff, I think it's definitely important that we're able to meet our goals with the provided speed. But one thing I noticed, and a big thing that we get, especially at CenturyLink, is the discrepancy between the available pipe speed that actually goes into the customer's equipment versus what they may actually be doing with that, though, too, because, it's not uncommon that we get quite a few complaints of someone saying that they're only getting half the speed they're paying for when the pipe speed is indeed there, and it can be a really healthy signal. But there might be something going on with interference or a device or two that's requiring extra bandwidth that's taking the resources from other stuff that they have.
Or a modem issue too.
Yep, internal wiring. It's a good point, Nolan, because it could be internal wiring too. Don't know until a tech checks it out. But you plug in directly from where it's coming in, and not the wireless itself. I want to make sure everyone saw what. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to expand on that as far as, when we do our standard speed testing, as far as, with company policy, it just states that, when we do that, it's best to do it over a hardline connection and make sure that there are no other devices that are currently connected so that we can get a better idea as to what's happening, whether it is a modem problem or if it's something with the end user's devices.
Correct.
And I want
to make sure.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, sorry. I was just going to say this. I get all of that, which is why when I talked about the survey that we're doing, and I said speed test is a snapshot in time, which it is, and there's a lot of other things that can go into it. What you do to try to get around that is get enough data points from enough places to take out those variables to the best that you possibly can. So I encourage us to think about it from that standpoint, is that we need to collect a lot of data to be able to say things about this. But if we can collect a lot of data, you'll see some pictures you'll see some trends, coming out of that.
Well, the FCC is investigating speed testing too, and so it'll be interesting to see how they wrestle with these issues about how to get accurate information and add that as an overlay to the mapping.
Last meeting about proposed letter to the legislature and the governor, and we got some feedback from the task force about weighing in favor of this additional allocation that's currently being considered at the state legislature. And I just wanted an update from you and your team about where we are on that communication and whether or not the task force was going to weigh in on this legislation.
Yeah, so good question, and I actually had it in the other business to give that update. But so last time we talked about, I know Matt came in and gave a little bit of it was pushing the envelope a little bit, kind of given the situation of, should we ask even for more at the time? And I think as a task force, we said, let's stick to the 30 million or so, right, that we had previously requested. The other thing also that I was cognizant of is that the task force had also said, we've asked for this, so, we have to be careful about going back to the governor and just saying, hey, look, we said 30, where's the 30, and not look like we're harassing kind of during a period of stress. So I did have a conversation with some folks, and there was, they said that they were going to work on putting some legislations together, and so that's what you saw, the $20 million that came through, the $10 million for the broadband capabilities, $8 million for education, and then $2 million for telemedicine was really what they were thinking about. The $30 million, it was like at this moment in time they want to reserve the funding a little bit to some of the, kind of where's the economy when we come back, how do we reopen, and all those kind of things. But they did feel like this was an important issue. So $20 million is what they were looking at, but obviously having teleeducation and telemedicine, that's kind of an immediate step of, as Mark and others mentioned, the reimbursement aspect of it, helping folks right now that are not able to take advantage of these things, or the schools are not able to offer some of these capabilities. That's something, if you make the funding available right away, something that we can put in place pretty quickly. So what we have to watch is sort of how this conversation here goes, as Paul mentioned, in the next couple of weeks when they have sort of the trade-offs and back and forth. I am going to meet with with Nathan even later today to see if there's something, does a letter help from us? Do we need to testify? Do we need to meet with some other folks? And I'll keep you posted on what happens there. But really the key is, can we support some of the efforts that, sort of jointly folks have put forward and everybody's behind it, and making sure we can land that plane. Assuming nothing else crazy happens in the next 2 weeks, everything, all the signs are very positive at the moment. Any questions or comments on that one? That is actually something I was going to kind of propose at the end, but.
Just say, I think it's great we use our voice. We're the task force on broadband, and I hope that we will. And I get it that a letter isn't always the most effective thing to do. Sometimes it is talking one-on-one or testifying. So I'm heartened to hear you're thinking about that and talking to the coalition about ways that the task force could weigh in favor of additional public investment at this time as part of COVID response. So thank you, Teddy.
No, absolutely. And the challenge, gets into the spot here. I wish we could, it is a good time to go talk about that. One of the things I want to say is, see, we should have had broadband. We'd have avoided all these issues had we had these things in place. The problem is, even if they make some of the funding available, the impact's not going to be immediate, but the impact still needs to happen. So it's a balance between, we need to make this investment in the future in case something like this happens. It's good to be upon it. At the same time, balancing with what's the actual need of today, right? Like, what do people actually need right now to be able to get through this crisis period? So, and I do appreciate what the legislation, and they're sort of thinking through this and pushing back and asking questions and all that. So, But yeah, as much as we can use our voice and be heard, and making sure that we can represent our thinking and what we should be doing for the greater good of Minnesota, that's awesome. The other piece, I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, but even on the you have the 20 million, and of the 8 and the 2, the education and the 2 million, if the education and the telemedicine, if that doesn't get used, those funds then revert back into the broadband piece, right? So let's say on the education side, there's 8 million, and it's only 4 gets used of that over the next few weeks, months. Then the other 4, I think it's actually still September, the other 4 actually come back into the broadband funding. So the overall issue, the overall thinking is this broadband thing needs to happen, and the investments need to occur there. Here's some temporary needs for telemedicine and teleeducation, but if the funding in the short term is not used for that, then that fund should roll back into the broadband piece. So that was also exciting to hear kind of their thinking around that piece.
Teddy, that's a good clarification, because I had understood that if it wasn't used, it was going back to the general fund. But you're saying that's not true. That it's going to the broadband fund if unused.
I
broadband fund
and rolling back. I also heard it was rolling back. Do you know, Paul?
I think if there's federal funds that are allocated, because there are potentially for some federal funds, whether it's telemedicine. I'd have to find the part of the bill that says that, but I think there was discussion on that.
I could comment. The Senate version wants the funds to come from the COVID relief dollars, and if they're not utilized, it goes back. This House version, initially, it was coming out of the general fund. And so that's the distinction. The Senate has a delete all bill that takes those funds from the COVID funds, and if they're not utilized, it goes back. That's pretty much the way I saw it.
So that may be the clarifications that we'll have to get, and maybe the voice, where we put our voice together there. So
yeah, that'll be part of the conference committee or whatever negotiated process they do to marry up these two bills, because they are different now.
My understanding is Representative Eklund is going to agree to what's in the Senate version. I spoke with him yesterday.
Okay.
And so clarification, this is Mark, did the Senate bill change? So someone was talking about the Senate bill, because the Senate bill was the first one, 4494, that had all of this. And I think it did talk about money going back into the broadband fund, but did that change? I heard someone say there might have been a delete all on the Senate bill that changed that. Is that true?
So I got an email from Nathan, our lobbyist for the Minnesota Greater Coalition of Broadband. Anyway, they did a delete all, and they've modified that funding, because that was a big holdup in the Senate, that it was coming out of the general fund. Even in the House, the chair of the committee was not comfortable, but that bill passed out of the House that way.
Yeah, this bill was tabled last week by the committee. It was quite a spirited debate, and so this delete all reflects, the ability to try to get that through the committee.
Okay. Well, I want to speak to Nathan again here at 1, and we'll see we'll see kind of where he's at, and then maybe if we need to draft something up in support of it, I'm happy to do that and share with the team. But I will commit to kind of giving you an update after I have that conversation and see where things stand, and then what we could potentially do if those funds are not available.
Yeah, Teddy, I just pulled it up, the delete all amendment, and there's sections with respect to telemedicine and distance learning, but on the lines 5.10, if the Commissioner of Management and Budget determines that any money spent from the appropriations made in this section, and this is the broadband section preceding, is an eligible expenditure from the Coronavirus Relief Fund in the federal fund, the amount of the expenditure is appropriated from the Coronavirus Relief account, and the corresponding amount is canceled from the general fund. So basically, if the Fed give us the money, we wouldn't be using Minnesota dollars to do broadband. But
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, interesting times. Okay, any other comments from the task force, or even I'll open it up to anybody else who's on the call that's maybe not part of the task force and wants to make some comments?
I just want everybody to see what Anna Boroff had shared on the chat as far as being able to see the networks and how they're performing across the United States. It is a really good tool. It's under the ncta.com/COVID dashboard. And you can go to any state and, you know, like Mark was talking about, all the bandwidth and the upstream in Minnesota is incredibly high compared to a lot of states. So, you know, it's everybody working from home, the schools, the homework getting uploaded. I have a daughter that she's a teacher and just recently moved to a new house and was trying to work in a parking lot at a school because she hadn't had her internet hooked up yet. And these are trying times for all, I tell you. But it's a very cool tool, so check it out. And thanks, Anna.
Yeah, thanks, Anna, for sharing that.
It is neat.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Other comments? No, thank you, Teresa. Other comments or questions from anyone?
Teddy, this is Diane. Are we talking about the May meeting yet, or are you getting ready to wrap? I just want to remind.
Getting ready to wrap, but as I was getting ready to wrap, I was actually pulling up my calendar to see when the next proposed meeting was. So right now, I think they have to meet May 20th. Is that when we have it on the calendar?
Right. So we've had the luxury of 4 to 5 weeks between so far this year. This one is just 3 weeks out, so we'll need to be putting an agenda together fairly quickly if folks have suggestions, ideas.
Yep, so if you have suggestions about speakers or topics we should be discussing other than the updates, please send them to Diane. And we have a quick turnaround, especially if we have to get speakers lined up and making sure they're available and get the time slots and all that arranged. So thanks for reminding us of that, Diane. Yep, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I suspect at this point it will also need to be a virtual meeting.
Yeah, I'm going to say most likely it will be a virtual meeting, but we'll keep posted on that. I know we're reopening a few things, but it probably makes sense to we'll keep it virtual for one more meeting and then go face-to-face in June. But if anything changes, we'll let everyone know. But I think seeing the videos has been great. It's fun to see people's faces and all that, so good to see you all. All right, if there's anything else, I was going to see if we're going to adjourn the meeting. Any other last comments or questions from the team here? Okay. Hearing nothing else, well, again, thank you for your time. I appreciate the commitment again and participating on this. Good information shared today, good discussions. Again, we'll look forward to the next meeting, virtual for the moment, and then I really do look forward to seeing you again face-to-face. So with that, we'll close the meeting, and thanks to all.